What's up guys, Marcus here, and today we're going to be talking about relationships, more specifically fictional relationships, because I don't think I'm qualified to talk about any other kind. Recently I've been thinking, what makes relationships in media well written? In the CW shows they have people in hallways talking about their feelings all the time, but they spend too much time on poorly developed relationships. Felicity and Oliver is still one of the weirdest relationships I've ever seen, and it's because they forced it way too much and didn't develop it properly, but more on that later. That brings me to Legion. So you guys know that I kinda like Legion, and one of the biggest reasons why is because of how well they explored the dynamic between David and Sid. Without going into spoilers, what makes the show so impactful is what they did in season 1, especially in chapter 1, to establish and develop their relationship. Because that relationship is the basis of the show, so it being properly developed in season 1 was very important, especially considering that it is the crux of a lot of plot points in the other 2 seasons. If you've seen the first part of my critique of Legion, you know that I praised the hell out of the development of Sid and David's relationship, and we're gonna talk about why it is so well done. What happens in chapter 1 of Legion is we get a montage of David and Sid bonding, while She's Like a Rainbow is playing. Just from that sentence, there's a lot to draw from to say why it's so well done. Firstly, with it being a montage, we see them bonding, so it already uses the time it has to show us how well they get along with each other, which is something that is confirmed time and time again throughout the season. So it's a good way to show the instant chemistry they have, and they don't just leave it at that, because that would be an incredibly cheap way to establish the relationship, which is why the entirety of season 1 deals with Sid and David's relationship being developed as one of its many subplots. Now, we see stuff like Sid drawing David, which could be a reference to the film Stay, them eating pie, all pretty standard stuff, but it shows that them being together in Clockworks is simple. It makes them happy and leaves them calm, which is made really clear by showing a flashback to David and his sister playing during the montage, which shows that David is calm and having fun with Sid, like he used to be with his sister when they were kids, and by them walking towards the day room in Clockworks that has blue lighting, which, in Legion, symbolizes David and him being calm and happy, while red is the opposite, which I won't go too much into so I don't spoil anything. And, last thing to mention about that sentence is the song that plays, She's Like a Rainbow. I already mentioned this in my critique, but it's important to reiterate it here to understand my point. When we first see present David, we see him talking to his sister, and he says lines like,
"It's just Thursday. My 260th Thursday. As a passenger on the cruise ship, mental health. Something new needs to happen soon."
Which show how miserable and bored David is at Clockworks. Basically, David has been in Clockworks for 5 years and he's losing his mind because of the monotony and the fact that everyone's insane there. The latter meaning that David doesn't have a normal person to talk to, the closest to that being Lenny, who is far from being normal.
Hey, where is he?
Who, the kid? He's climbing a mountain. He's got his crampons on.
Especially when we see a flash of David in the room he talked to his sister, but he's alone this time. So, when he finds someone like Sid, who is mostly normal, who he can bond with so easily, and who he gets along with so well, it breaks that monotony and the cycle of nothingness he's been experiencing every day since he was admitted into Clockworks. That is why She's Like a Rainbow plays. The song has a very deep meaning in this episode because David's life has been completely monotonous, empty, lifeless, and just grey for the past 5 years. Now Sid is finally bringing color into his life and stopping the monotony. Now, having just that as evidence that they really care about each other isn't enough. We'll learn that they spent 1 year together in Clockworks, but that comes from a throwaway line. So just saying that they spent a year together isn't enough to say they were well developed, even after the montage. We need more, which we also get after chapter 1, and is seen throughout the rest of the first season, but we also get that as soon as the montage ends. In what I would call the sweetest moment between David and Sid, we get David showing affection towards Sid in a way no one in her life has shown before. Not in such an understanding way of her condition, and not in a way that isn't about power, it's about genuine love.
Power? I thought sex was about love. Can't be.
We get an insight into Sid's way of thinking.
See how the hospital disappears? You can see yourself down there. Like, you're in here, watching yourself outside.
Which now is way less cocky than when they were in the therapy session.
That's sad? You're in a mental hospital.
Now we see that Sid wants to live a normal life, and then David showing that kind of affection towards her is him understanding what she wants, and giving it to her in a way that respects the boundaries Sid created, which is something Sid has suffered from people not understanding her condition her entire life. So, the point I'm trying to make in this video is to show how well Legion utilizes its time in its first episode to develop the relationship between David and Sid. It didn't have to be long or rely on cliches, and it's mostly just told visually, and with the implied meaning from the song playing. And this is far from being the end of their development. Episodes 2 and 3 develop their relationship a whole lot more, as does the rest of season 1, but my point is mainly focused on how, with the limited and quick amount of time in the first episode of the show, their relationship was developed enough so that we can understand where their relationship is, and how important they are to each other. Introducing a relationship and developing it enough to make people care about it isn't that hard, and Legion is an amazing example of why. To contrast, I want to talk about some examples of media that do that poorly. Firstly, we have Below Her Mouth, a film about a lesbian womanizer tomboy named Dallas who meets a married woman called Jasmine, and they start going out together when Jasmine's husband is out of town. Yeah, the premise for that film is nowhere near being original, but the problem with that film is that they don't develop at all reasons for Jasmine to fall in love with Dallas in such a short period of time, especially considering how much we're told throughout the film that Jasmine loves her husband.
You are the most faithful person I know. You and Ryle are like Mary and the fucking Carpenter.
And we also were given no reason for Dallas to decide to stop going after other women to be only with Jasmine, considering how she's shown not to care about the women she sleeps with throughout the film. Dallas's character arc, where she apologizes to her ex-girlfriend.
I'm toxic for you. Because I don't love you the way you love me. Sorry.
Who we see Dallas break up with in the beginning of the film only happens because of what she supposedly learned from being with Jasmine. So that entire arc is broken, because the relationship between Dallas and Jasmine isn't developed at all. Instead, we just see lots of very explicit sex scenes between the two, which is why so many people call this film a porn with good cinematography, and I'd have to agree. But no one's seen that film, so how about something a bit more mainstream? Even though I like the first Thor film, it's not good, and that comes mostly from one very big problem, and that's that Thor and Jane Foster's relationship isn't developed almost at all. You may think it's not really a big deal, but the entire plot of the film relies on that development. Jane, in this film, is supposed to be the person that finds humanity in Thor. It makes Thor stop being the arrogant person that he is, since that's what made him not worthy of the hammer anymore.
You have betrayed the express command of your king. Through your arrogance and stupidity, you have opened these peaceful realms and innocent lives to the horror and desolation of war!
The problem is that we don't get that development on screen. Thor tries to get Mjolnir and fails, then Loki sends a destroyer to Earth, giving no time for Thor to have a change of character in the entire film. So when Thor becomes worthy of wielding Mjolnir again, which saves him from death, it's unearned, because Jane's relationship with him wasn't developed at all to reach a point where Thor changes enough to become worthy again, and to find his humanity inside him, because there was nothing in the film that could have made that happen. It's just a sudden change that would have been a very good payoff if the build-up to it was well done, but it wasn't, which is why I'd say Thor should have been at least 15 minutes longer, just to have more time for Jane and Thor to bond and for Jane to teach him about the wonders of humanity. Lastly, another example of bad relationships in media is Felicity and Oliver from the CW show Arrow, that my good friend Jeb is going to talk about here.
Hey everyone, it's your president here, Jabaya. So why is Felicity and Oliver from Arrow a flawed relationship? To answer that question, it would be since Arrow likes to make it the forefront of everything and will undermine character writing to ensure it's the forefront. Whilst the relationship dynamic being a forefront of the show isn't necessarily a bad thing, it is how you do it. For example, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. has Fitzsimmons. Often these are at the forefront of stories, however in each of those stories they will progress the characters involved and play a part into the story arc. This is especially prevalent in Season 3 when they are separated. In this separation we see Fitz develop confidence, determination and such, and Simmons will develop independence, with this separation being the catalyst for the rest of Season 3, especially for their relationship. However, with Felicity, I want to demonstrate how it fails at this with one particular episode, the episode Taken. Now before I get into this problematic episode for them, I will give context of the episode and explore two scenes. So, during Season 4, Oliver discovers that he has a son named William with an ex named Samantha. He knew she was pregnant at the time. However, Moira attempted to coerce Samantha to fake a miscarriage to Oliver via money. However, Samantha ultimately did it because she wanted to be away from the family and she never cashed that check. When Oliver confronted her, it ended in an ultimatum. Oliver can only meet William if neither their son nor anyone else ever know their relationship. Bear that anyone else, that will be important in a second. In the episode Taken, Damien Dark provides Oliver with a ransom.
William thinks that I'm friends with his mother. Funny. Anywho, 6 o'clock on Friday, you're going to hold a press conference and drop out of the mayoral race.
Due to this ransom, Oliver tells the team about William, including Felicity. Here we come to the first problematic scene I want to explore with Felicity. In this scene here, we see Oliver and Felicity talk about the situation. The first issue with the scene is how callous Felicity is about the situation given the context.
Best thing for him was to keep his world separate from mine. After everything that has happened, can you really say that she was wrong?
Well, it didn't work, did it?
Oliver's son had just been kidnapped, and the forefront she makes is about her and how she can't trust him.
What does it say about our relationship if your first instinct is to always hide the truth?
Now, if Oliver didn't explain the situation, there'd be somewhat justification. After all, they're engaged by this point, and it's a major secret to not tell your significant other. However, Oliver even tells her in this scene he has held out an ultimatum, yet she still relents with this passive-aggressive behaviour towards him.
William's mother made a condition that the only way I would be allowed to meet my son is if I agreed to keep him secret. Even from you.
The intent of the scene is to portray Oliver as wrong for doing he actually did, yet the stakes are Oliver loses his son if he runs the risk of telling others. Every other instance where someone else knows, it was out of his control to do so. For example, in this scene, Thea confronts Oliver about him having a son. She figures this out. Obviously in the scene Felicity doesn't know this, but why doesn't she ask? Or why doesn't Oliver explain in the scene? She also in this scene does consistent digs at Oliver.
Maybe it would be easier to list the people who don't know about your son.
Bearing in mind Oliver has his son kidnapped. He is under duress, yet she wants to berate him. How can we be sympathetic to Felicity in this scene, or even be against Oliver? Oliver has completely understandable reasoning for not telling Felicity. He doesn't want anyone to know. He doesn't want to lose his son. However, Felicity expects this to not matter and him to still be honest.
Oliver, you're the only person on the planet that considers the truth complicated.
That's unbelievably selfish and quite honestly sociopathic from her. However, this isn't even the worst part for this episode. There is an even worse scene I am going to break down. This dreaded scene. So if you thought the first scene was bad, this is tenfold. In this scene we see Felicity leave Oliver calling off the engagement. The reason why she does this is because she wasn't told. Not because others were, just her.
I know it was an impossible decision, but you were right.
You should have told me.
So why is this scene a problem? Firstly, she states she knows it was an impossible decision, yet she still berates him despite this. She still demands that she should have known, and that is stated as the main reason why they are breaking up. She then states how Oliver doesn't know how to lean on their partner when things are complicated.
Marriage is about inclusion, leaning on your partner when things get complicated. I don't think that you know how to do that.
This demonstrates Felicity is generally despicable. She is unsympathetic to him, and she is self-centered with no consideration to how Oliver must be right now. Especially when Oliver, as also she states later in the scene, had to send his son away. The forefront must be how she feels. She's also unable to be reasoned with. She's so focused on herself that she doesn't even show compassion with this being an impossible situation. If you're someone defending her actions with this, imagine yourself in Oliver's position at this moment in point. Could you imagine how it must feel right now as Oliver to lose your son and to hear this from the person he loves?
You should have told me.
This then gets stated further when she understands him sending William away, but she's mad because she didn't get to be part of that decision. This isn't her decision to make. This is Oliver's and Samantha's. They're the parents of the child. Felicity has no right to demand she should be part of the decision on the safety of William. The scene then ends with her getting in the feelings and her legs back and walking away. This is to try and match the theme of her walking away from the relationship. This scene is honestly an embarrassment to writing relationships in media. We are supposed to understand both sides and find this emotional hitch in their relationship. However, due to the previous scene I explored and this scene, it just comes off as infuriating. Oliver is seen as the bad guy in all this, and Felicity's side is meant to be understood. Yet due to her lack of compassion and her sociopathic behaviour, we have that inherent disconnect. We're just left bewildered by her behaviour. In this scene, she just comes across as dislikable, and the show repeats this kind of behaviour with her, whilst making Oliver consistently the bad guy. In the end, it just grows infuriating, and you just wonder why Oliver is with this awful individual, when he could have someone who would genuinely care about him. This is why I stand firm on the conclusion that this is what makes a relationship not well written. To be a well written relationship, you need two characters that are understandable motivations and for them to overlap in some fashion. Unfortunately, Felicity doesn't have a character that is understandable, just a careless individual and someone who for some reason has taken that. This is a contrast to an example I mentioned earlier, Fitzsimmons, where all their motivations make sense. Felicity is often regarded as the reason why Arrow worsened over time, since they made that the forefront, and this episode demonstrates why. You can't root for that relationship after what Felicity has done. Whereas with Fitzsimmons or David and Sid, their motivations align with what is established for their character, whilst making sense from their perspective. This crucial ingredient is what is the key to well-written relationships. Understandable characters that develop together and stay consistent with their character writing.
Now, in conclusion, considering the examples I used, I want to show that what makes a relationship well written is the development. I used only the examples of romantic relationships, but any type of relationship needs to follow that. Example being Sam and Dean's relationship as brothers in Supernatural, a relationship with 15 years of development. However, that development needs time and attention. We can't just skip to the end. We can't just say they love each other if we haven't seen that. It's basic show don't tell, because we need to be shown how the characters that we've been following feel about each other, how they grow to like each other, and why they would care about one another. Which is why Legion is perfect. Which is why my example with Legion is perfect. In Legion, they show them getting along with each other and show that they have good chemistry together from the start. That's a good starting point, but they also spent season 1 developing their relationship so that how attached they are to each other makes sense, and we can have the full scope of the relationship by the end of the season, which is very important for when we get to season 2 and 3. Also, if you follow me on Twitter, you may know this, but I adore The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and I actually think it's really well written, especially due to the Gwen and Peter relationship in it, which is a perfect example to use here, considering how important it is to the overall plot.
The architecture of the movie is built on their relationship, and you have to start them in the right place, because if you don't, then it just doesn't land.
Contrasting with the examples we used, it's shown that a lack of development is what hurts those relationships. We have no reason to see why Oliver would want to be with Felicity considering how much of a cunt she is. Like how Felicity causes issues plot-wise since they couldn't find a good way to create conflict between Felicity and Oliver due to their lack of relationship development, which ended up creating the huge problem that Jeb highlighted. Because the conflict was artificial, therefore the development and resolution also were. All due to how Felicity lacked development to get to a point where that conflict could have worked without unrealistically making Felicity seem sociopathic. But she's viewed as right in that situation, which is also a problem with MJ's Spider-Man 2, but that's a conversation for another time, or another video, link in the description. Also, the relationship between Dallas and Jasmine doesn't work due to the lack of character development and relationship development. We just jump to the endgame of their relationship instead of naturally getting there, which could be hard to do in just one film, but that's a constraint they put on themselves while making it. And with Thor, the relationship having only one scene of development hurts the film a lot, since that relationship is supposed to define Thor's entire character arc, as I've explained earlier. As you can see, it all comes down to development. It's clear that development is the basic necessity for a well-written relationship. So we can conclude this video by answering the question posed by its title. What makes a relationship well written? Well, it's being Fitzsimmons, or the proper development to understand the characters and their dynamics so that the plot that is affected by the relationship can properly move forward without flaws in its internal consistency. Which is basically Fitzsimmons.